In this edition of One American News Investigates, we expose the corruption of Joe Biden, his campaign, his legacy, and a desperate media apparatus scrambling to protect him. Our investigation into Biden corruption takes us next to a series of just-released phone recordings out of Ukraine. Recordings that tell a corruption tale so damaging, the Biden campaign even sent their media hitmen to try and kill it. They failed, and we bring this story straight to you, the American people, for you to decide. What you're about to hear is a continuation of OAN's exclusive series investigating Biden corruption in Ukraine, a story where truth in Biden's world is truly darker than fiction. Joe Biden's Ukraine problem boils down to a simple charge. Vice President Biden, as Ukraine point man under Obama, bribed the Ukrainian government with $1 billion U.S. tax dollars. Biden's bribe was designed for one thing: to stop the investigation into his son Hunter and Burisma oil, the Ukrainian company paying Hunter Biden $83,000 a month to simply sit on its board. But rather than acknowledging any of this, the media played cover-up for Biden, stating it was all conspiracy theories and Russian propaganda. Shokin, they said, was a corrupt prosecutor general and had to go. This narrative made it all the way to Congress in defense of Biden.
The facts about Vice President Biden's conduct are clear and do not change. Let's go through them. First, every witness asked about this topic testified that Mr. Shokin was widely considered to be a corrupt and ineffective prosecutor.
But the entire Biden narrative that Victor Shokin was a, quote, bad guy who needed replacing was turned completely on its head by Ukrainian Member of Parliament Andrei Derkach. In a one-hour press conference on May 19, 2020, Derkach released phone recordings of Joe Biden, Secretary of State John Kerry, and President Petro Poroshenko, all discussing the fate of Prosecutor General Victor Shokin. In this December 3, 2015 recording, Secretary of State John Kerry proposes to President Poroshenko the idea that Biden would really like to see the Prosecutor General problem resolved.
But before Vice President Biden comes, I just wanted to try to urge you to see if there's a way to get by this problem of replacing the Prosecutor General, Shokin, because from our perception, he's blocked the cleanup of the Prosecutor General's office, and I know the Vice President is very concerned about it.
The awkward coincidence in taking issue with Victor Shokin at this time was the fact that Victor Shokin's office happened to be investigating Burisma oil. In fact, Shokin had declared the founder of Burisma a fugitive of Ukraine. Burisma was Ukraine's largest oil and gas company and was paying Joe Biden's drug addict son, Hunter, $83,000 per month to ostensibly do nothing but sit there. New York Times bestselling author Peter Schweitzer tells One American News, Joe Biden claimed to know nothing of his son's business dealings overseas, yet deals just fell in Hunter's lap without justification in all the countries for which Joe Biden was point man.
Hunter Biden lucrative deals in both countries that he had zero qualifications for and had zero background in. And so the question is, and it's a very simple question, is what were the Chinese and the Ukrainians paying for? We know that Hunter Biden has no expertise. We know he can't add any value to the company with regards to a skill set or an ability to advise him in any way. So what are they actually paying for? And I think that's a question that Hunter Biden should be asked. And I think the U.S. Senate should ask it.
But it wasn't just Joe Biden's son. John Kerry had an interest in getting Victor Shokin out of the Prosecutor General's office as well. Another American named Devon Archer was appointed to the board of Burisma. Archer, too, made tens of thousands of dollars per month off Burisma oil. Devon Archer was Hunter Biden's friend and business partner. Devon also just happened to be John Kerry's senior advisor during Kerry's presidential campaign, and just happened to be the college roommate and later business partner of Christopher Hines, John Kerry's stepson. Another awkward fact for Kerry: John Kerry's chief of staff, David Leiter, was also making money off of Burisma holdings. Burisma paid Kerry's chief of staff $90,000 in 2014 to lobby Congress and the State Department. 4 days after Kerry's discussion about the problem of Viktor Shokin, Joe Biden flew to Ukraine. Here's where the timeline gets interesting. 2 months later, on February 2nd, 2016, Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin's office seized Burisma founder Nikolai Zlochevsky's property and assets.
That's the month in which Shokin, who supposedly wasn't investigating anybody, that's another Biden lie, raided Burisma and put them under arrest. The owner of Burisma, who was crooked as all get out, Zlochevsky, was afraid his business was going to be taken away, and he brought Biden in for what he had bribed Biden to do, which was to fix the case for him.
Let's revisit our interview with Shokin back in Kyiv. I asked Shokin why he resigned, and he affirmed what he had sworn in a 12-page affidavit. He was pressured to resign because his office started seizing Burisma assets and in the process began to unveil Hunter Biden's involvement in illegal money laundering. My conversation with Poroshenko on this, Shokin says, was in a phone call. It was after we started seizing Burisma assets in Ukraine when Poroshenko called me and said, "Listen, this all has to stop already. Joe Biden's temper is overflowing. This seizing of Burisma assets," said Poroshenko, was the last straw. Shokin says Poroshenko then paid him a visit in his office, asking for Shokin's resignation. Shokin responded and asked, "Why do I have to go? I haven't done anything wrong. I'm doing my job. This is standard procedure. We have reason to freeze Burisma assets." And Poroshenko said, "Biden is angry about you freezing Burisma assets. I'll figure something out." Now, the media and the Biden campaign slammed this account when it was first broadcasted, accusing Shokin of lying and arguing ad nauseum that Biden had Shokin removed because he was a corrupt prosecutor. When we return, Derkach's press conference reveals an explosive conversation between Biden and Poroshenko that directly contradicts Biden's claims about Viktor Shokin. Following conversation, dated February 18, 2015, appears to show Poroshenko admitting Shokin did nothing wrong, but was forced to resign anyways, at Biden's request.
The Situation Room is...
Hello. Joe Biden.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Your call is reconvened.
Petro, can you hear me?
Yeah, that was better.
I can hear you better too. I'm sorry. You were saying, I missed what you were saying.
Yeah. So, first of all, I'm very happy to hear you. Second, this is very valuable for me that you find out a time for me, even in Minnesota. And I'm dreaming some days to be in Minnesota.
That's easy, man. I tell you what, I'd like to be with you instead of Minnesota right now, but go ahead.
The third, I have some positive and negative news. I will start with the positive news.
Well, good.
Joe, I have a second positive news for you. Yesterday, I met with the General Prosecutor Shokin.
Yes.
And despite of the fact that we didn't have any corruption charges, we don't have any information about he doing something wrong, I especially asked him, no, it was the day before yesterday, I especially asked him to resign.
Derkach told One American News these are only parts of a larger stash of recordings. We have chosen fragments from the many hours of recordings, says Derkach, which were recommended to us by investigative journalists. What was the most astonishing about these recordings is the direct evidence of treason and government betrayal. Rudy Giuliani tells One American News this only confirms the work of John Solomon, OAN, and the evidence he has handed over himself to the DOJ.
Poroshenko makes it clear to him that Shokin was not corrupt. That was a cover story they were using in order to justify getting rid of him. Now, you can remember last year when this first came out, all the Biden sycophants talked about how corrupt Shokin is.
While U.S. media seemed largely to ignore these recordings, OAN decided to dig deeper. Connecting with unnamed intelligence and government sources in Ukraine, OAN discovered an additional 5 hours of recordings that had yet to be published. In this discovery, we confirmed for ourselves that indeed the Nabu leaks press releases were mere fragments of a much more explosive story. John Kerry, Joe Biden, President Poroshenko, all on record discussing the delicate business of firing the highest law enforcement official in Ukraine in exchange for $1 billion U.S. tax dollars. An extraordinary unraveling. Let's go back to the conversation where Poroshenko tells Biden he has received the resignation letter from Viktor Shokin.
And as a finish of my meeting with him, he promised me to give me the statement on resignation. And 1 hour ago, he bring me the written statement of his resignation.
Great.
And this is my second step for keeping my promises.
I agree.
Once Shokin is finally removed from office, Poroshenko has another conversation with Biden about Shokin's replacement.
Assuming that there is a new government and a new prosecutor general, I am prepared to do a public signing of the commitment for the $1 billion. Again, I'm not suggesting that that's what you want or don't want. I'm just suggesting that that's what we're prepared to do. And again, it wouldn't be finalized until, the IMF pieces are written.
Extremely strong motivation. One of the possible candidates was leader of my faction, Lutsenko, who is the public figure. If you think that the political motivated figure would be not very good from your point of view, I recall this proposal. I do not propose, because nobody knows that I want to propose Lutsenko.
Biden goes on to say he will consider this option and get back with Poroshenko on the matter. Take a step back for a moment. The conversation you just heard would be parallel to Prince Charles calling President Trump and telling him to remove Attorney General William Barr and provide him with replacement options, of which his team would consider for the United States. An assault on sovereignty by every definition. One American News caught up with New York Times bestselling author of Profiles in Corruption, Peter Schweitzer.
Federal law says if you are a public official, that includes the Vice President of the United States, and you are making decisions that are going to materially benefit members of your family, that's a violation of federal law. And even though the initial claims were that this individual was not investigating Hunter Biden, we know that he was.
Here is a document showing how many investigations there were regarding Mr. Zlochevsky and Burisma.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
If, in fact, we could confirm that these recordings are accurate, it's further confirmation that Joe Biden is making a material decision to effect a criminal investigation in a foreign country that involves his son and involves a company that is paying his son $1 million a year. And that, to me, again, seems to pretty consistently violate U.S. federal ethics laws, which preclude government officials from making those kinds of actions or engaging in those kinds of decision-making.
Derkach, as a member of parliament, filed a statement with the prosecutor general's office to investigate the matter, charging former President Poroshenko of conspiracy with Joe Biden and John Kerry to, quote, put pressure on the members of Ukrainian parliament to make decisions beneficial for Biden and Kerry. Derkach charges Poroshenko of treason under Article 3 of the Ukrainian Criminal Code.
I mean, the information is quite incriminating if you know the case. I mean, first of all, it shows that Biden has been lying about the fact that he was unaware of the case, or he was unaware of his son's business in Ukraine, because he talks about his son's business in Ukraine. So it makes him a liar about that.
Fast forward in the timeline to May 13, 2016. One day after Yuri Lutsenko was appointed to replace Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin. Biden was especially happy about Lutsenko's appointment. Lutsenko did not have any legal experience. Yet, was appointed to lead the highest legal office in Ukraine. Biden seems eager to immediately direct Lutsenko's next moves.
Congratulations on installing the new prosecutor general. It's going to be critical for him to work quickly to repair the damage Shokin did. And I'm a man of my word. And that now that the new prosecutor general is in place, we're ready to move forward in signing that new $1 billion loan guarantee.
Derkach reiterated the recordings released in his one-hour briefing were fragments. Giuliani says the conversations that came after Lutsenko was installed would be especially revelatory.
And I would hope that those tapes are put out also. And there are some that are far more damaging than that one.
Giuliani is right. In the additional recordings provided by top intelligence officials to OAN, official and unofficial recordings are proving Biden was far more involved in the Ukrainian prosecutor general's office than he has publicly admitted. A possibility the Biden campaign seems to fear so much, they immediately sent a media lapdog to find out what we had and chill our story. Joe Biden's abuse of power as vice president and point man in Ukraine does not seem to receive much media fanfare. You're right. Peter Schweitzer says one reason the Bidens keep evading scrutiny is media's systematic cover-up of all Biden's sins, especially in Ukraine.
I think the general problem is more with the editors. And what's stunning in the case of Hunter Biden as it relates to Ukraine is the complete and total lack of any curiosity about these deals. I mean, think about it. I mean, if this were Donald Trump Jr., they would all be investigating it. And by the way, they should. That's their job. But for some reason, they don't feel it's even necessary to put a reporter on this. These are very simple, basic questions involving a foreign government, not a foreign company, a foreign government setting up a profitable venture for the son of the sitting American vice president. And for the media to say, we don't think there's a story there, when they haven't even looked at it, is really absolutely shocking.
I reached out to Joe Biden's campaign for comment on the Derkach released recordings and the additional recordings OAN was now investigating. I found Biden's communications director, Kate Bedingfield, who is frequently found giving interviews on cable news. Dear Miss Bedingfield, I wrote, I am seeking Mr. Biden's or the campaign's comment on this series of phone recordings allegedly portraying the voices of Mr. Biden and President Poroshenko of Ukraine. I asked whether Mr. Biden would affirm or deny the recordings and that we had over 5 hours of recordings beyond what was posted online by Nabu Leaks. Barely 24 hours later, I received a response. Not from the Biden campaign, but from a magazine, The Atlantic. A writer named Isaac Dover sent the following message. Hi, Chanel. I'm told that you have 5 hours of recordings of Joe Biden and Petro Poroshenko on top of what has been put out by Nabu Leaks. He proceeds to ask what is in the additional recordings, who I received them from, and later asserts that these recordings are tied to Russian intelligence. Dover also raises a suspicious brow, assuming these recordings were brought to me. Dover makes what later proved to be a false claim that he is writing a story on these recordings as well. Catching me by phone, Dover insisted I divulge my source of the additional recordings OAN was investigating. Refusing to oblige this unethical request, I in turn asked Dover whether the Biden campaign regularly sent him internal communiques. I also asked whether the DNC or the Biden campaign advertised with The Atlantic and its affiliates. Dover did not answer these questions. The Biden campaign never responded to my request, seeming instead content to send Dover instead. Interestingly, Dover has a history of attacking other journalists in defense of Joe Biden. In 2019, Isaac Dover was called out for spreading tabloid-level lies about a pro-Sanders journalist. The Atlantic published Dover's article, but stealth-edited the piece after the fact in order to correct the slanderous lies Dover manufactured. Journalist Glenn Greenwald exposed Dover's work at length, concluding, The Atlantic's article was false in almost every material respect. If The Atlantic's Isaac Dover were Team Biden's solution to chilling stories against Joe, it seems it would behoove them to find a more cunning tool from the toolbox. We continued our investigation sifting through new recordings. The 5 hours of recorded conversation turned into 10. This time, what appears to be private conversations between Biden and Poroshenko. Conversations showing deals bargained, promises made, coming from Ukrainian Secret Service and separately confirmed by a source who was present during some of these recordings. We realized this story would go well past the summer and into the fall as we embarked on the long journey of verifying and investigating these additional recordings. But Dover did not stop with his initial inquiry to me. Dover went the extra step of reaching out to OAN leadership to try and cast doubt on the story, desperate to assume that whatever we had was the product of Russian intelligence. Note, Dover still didn't know what we had. Before this portion of the investigation was broadcast, Dover published his article in The Atlantic, an article not about the Biden recordings for which he had feigned such keen interest. Dover's story turns out to be a thinly cited hit piece on OAN. Is OAN the leading edge of Russian misinformation? The Biden campaign says Trump's favorite TV network is peddling the Kremlin's lies. A far cry from the headline Dover implied. Even more curious, a headliner charge waged before even seeing the evidence or the investigation. Accuse first, verify never? Dover conveniently procured a response from the Biden campaign. Team Biden turned to the ever-creative, pay no mind, it's all Russian propaganda, hypnosis. And The Atlantic waltzed right along. Little wonder the once respected magazine went from a $10 million a year profit down to a bleeding 500,000 circulation, hemorrhaging money, readers, and integrity. Not necessarily in that order.
Isn't it amazing? These allegations have been out there for 3 years, right? And all the Biden people do is they've been debunked, they've been investigated and done away with. Of course, they haven't been. And this is the first time in 3 years that anybody's going to interview any of the witnesses.
This pattern of cover-up and intimidation may help explain how exactly Joe Biden has made it this far. No doubt The Atlantic is just one of many manipulated media puppets at Biden's disposal. After all, with Biden's nearly 50 years in the D.C. swamp, relationships are made. The question is, for how long can they simply use the Russian propaganda boogeyman to stave off the mounting evidence? They're pulling out all the stops. Will it be enough? So how was Derkach's explosive press release about Biden bribes received in Ukraine? Andrei Derkach told One American News President Zelensky called for an investigation, agreeing that Poroshenko partook in at least high treason. But Zelensky later walked back his statement, feeling such an investigation would harm Joe Biden so badly, Zelensky pulled back for fear his government would be accused of interfering with the upcoming U.S. presidential elections. But Derkach argues this is a Ukrainian matter. Joe Biden was the one who interfered, and a joint investigation commission should investigate. Ukraine is an independent country and cannot be governed by external forces, especially for the sake of selfish personal interests. Just 2 days after Derkach's press conference sharing Biden's bribe tapes, a Ukrainian court formally listed Viktor Shokin the victim of a crime committed by Vice President Joe Biden to illegally remove Shokin from office using a monetary bribe. A case that will continue well into the fall. So stay with us. This is an ongoing investigation, and it's only just begun. In the next installment of this OAN exclusive investigation, we share official and what even appears to be unofficial audio recordings of Joe Biden's wheeling and dealing. We look into what happened to Biden's $1 billion bribe and show irrefutable evidence of how your $1 billion tax dollars found a cozy home in Poroshenko's pockets. Biden wants this story to disappear. He is sending his global attack puppets in the press to discredit, slime, and slander. But rest assured, we are unfazed and we are unafraid. We won't stop until the truth about Biden's legacy is fully unfurled. So stay tuned every Saturday and Sunday, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, for the latest episode of OAN Investigates. For One American News, I'm Chanel Vian. Thank you for watching. In this edition of One American News Investigates, we follow the money. Vice President Joe Biden bribes a Ukrainian president with U.S. tax dollars to protect his son Hunter. A prosecutor general gets fired. Money changes hands. And Biden feigns innocence. In part one, we showed you phone recordings between Joe Biden and President Poroshenko. In part two, we show why Ukraine's president was so eager to accept Biden's terms and demands. Despite the evidence of Biden's corruption, despite the money trail, despite the recordings, corporate media and the Democrat machine believe if they continue to ignore the evidence, the American voter will ignore it too, all the way to the ballot box. This is a continuation of OAN's exclusive series investigating Biden corruption in Ukraine, a story where truth in Biden's world is truly darker than fiction. Everyone denies wrongdoing. Joe Biden says he didn't bribe Ukraine with $1 billion to remove a pesky prosecutor general.
I'm a man of my word. And that now that the new prosecutor general is in place, we're ready to move forward in signing that new $1 billion loan guarantee.
Biden's friend, former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, says he wasn't pressured by Biden to force the prosecutor general to resign.
He promised me to give me the statement on resignation. And 1 hour ago, he bring me the written statement of his resignation.
Great.
And this is my second step for keeping my promises.
I agree.
Joe Biden's son Hunter, who was being paid over $80,000 a month to merely exist on the board of Burisma Holdings, Ukraine's largest natural gas company, claims his father knew nothing whatsoever about his dealings in Ukraine.
Did you and your father ever discuss Ukraine?
No.
Hunter was only involved in one of the most scandal-drenched companies in Ukraine. Joe Biden was the Ukraine point man, involved down to the minute details of discussing who would occupy what roles in the prosecutor general's office. And still, he claims he never discussed Ukraine with his son Hunter. Rudy Giuliani, attorney to the president, renowned for dismantling crime families in New York, says Biden's ignorance here is an act.
Same question here with the Bidens. He becomes a senator. Right away, the brother gets a sweetheart loan. Joe says, I don't know about my family's business. Then there's another deal and another deal. Joe's answer is always the same. I don't know about my family's business. There comes a time when you have to know about your family's business. Otherwise, it's proof that you're actually involved in it. It's very, very sad. It's very sad for him. It's very sad for his family. But it's a tragedy for the United States that a lot of our media is deliberately covering up a very, very, very substantial crime.
With over 10 hours of recordings of both official and private conversations between Joe Biden and President Poroshenko, it is painfully clear the actors in the Biden-Ukraine drama are lying. Hundreds of millions were made on both sides, stashed away perhaps into the likes of offshore accounts like the Bank of N.T. Butterfield & Son in Hamilton, Bermuda, and other tax-free havens. All the while, Biden, Poroshenko, and the Democrat Party machine insist Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin was a corrupt man who had to go. But as we demonstrated in part one of this series, not only was Shokin doing his job and cracking down on Biden-tied corruption, but Poroshenko admits to Joe Biden Prosecutor General Shokin actually did nothing wrong. It's worth listening to again.
Joe, I have a second positive news for you. Yesterday, I met with the General Prosecutor Shokin.
Yes.
And despite of the fact that we didn't have any corruption charges, we don't have any information about he doing something wrong, I especially asked him. No, it was the day before yesterday. I especially asked him to resign.
In the hours of recordings between these two men, It is clear Poroshenko was all but backflipping for Joe Biden's every request. But today, Poroshenko and Biden seem to pretend these conversations never happened. Corporate media dismiss these recordings too, and Poroshenko plays right along.
You spoke with Vice President Biden many times over the course of the period when you were president, he was vice president. He pressed you on many issues. Did he ever bring up the topic of Burisma, the company that employed his son as one of its board of directors?
So my absolutely clear answer, no, never.
Lies come easy when there's so much to lose, or when there's a lot to hide. So who's hiding what? Joe Biden hides how he interfered in the governance of a foreign country to protect his own son from investigation. Poroshenko hides how he followed Biden's illegal demands. But why was Poroshenko so eager to please Joe Biden's every whim? To break the law and fire a prosecutor general he himself admitted did nothing wrong. The story is, Ukraine desperately needed the loan guarantees Biden was dangling. Indeed, the year Hunter Biden was appointed to the board of Burisma, Ukraine suffered a devastating betrayal. Former President Viktor Yanukovych had run off to Moscow, taking with him Ukraine's entire treasury, or nearly all of it. Ukrainians woke up the next morning to discover Ukraine was left with $8,000. So when millionaire chocolate magnate Petro Poroshenko ran for office and won that same year in 2014, things were looking up. Giuliani recalls the optimism over Poroshenko's victory.
Poroshenko was the great hope. I remember that because I have great interest in Ukraine. And I remember being told that by Senator McCain. I remember being told that by other members of my party. I remember being told that by Democrats and Ukrainian American friends that I have. Poroshenko is wonderful. He's a rich man. He's not going to be corrupt. And we can trust him.
6 years later, Poroshenko is no longer president. And by July 2020, Poroshenko is implicated in 24 criminal probes. Let's go back to the money Joe Biden was offering Poroshenko, the $1 billion in U.S. tax dollars to help Ukraine in aid. Did Poroshenko do Biden's bidding, fire Viktor Shokin, ease off Hunter Biden and Burisma out of pure patriotism to help his country? Or was it greed? Poroshenko, by conservative estimates, is worth over $700 million. But extravagant wealth does not necessarily negate greed.
When I went back to Ukraine 2 years later, and I asked two people they know, why is he so corrupt? And that would be Viktor Pinchuk and Vitaly Klitschko. They said because he was a millionaire, he wanted to be a billionaire. And he wanted to be the biggest oligarch. He was jealous of Kolomoisky and Pinchuk, and he wanted to be like them. And they told me in very simple terms, there's nothing in this country that happens where he doesn't take a piece of it. And I said, it reminds me of The Godfather. There's a scene in The Godfather where the guy who controls this little mafia thing says to the young Godfather, you know, every time you steal money or take money, I have to wet my beak. I have to wet my beak. And they said, yeah, it's like that. He wets his beak. Everything. Anything goes on here, Poroshenko gets a piece of it.
Given this vantage, was it patriotic duty driving Poroshenko to play Joe Biden's lapdog? Or was it Poroshenko with dollar signs in his eyes, with dreams of fattening his many enterprises and his offshore tax-free bank accounts? When it comes to the Biden bribe tapes, there's no mistaking. Poroshenko does everything he can to please Biden to get his $1 billion in U.S. loan guarantees, which eventually he does get. But before diving into the next round of recordings, we need first to discern motivations. Andrei Derkach, member of Ukraine Parliament, who, through his extensive investigations, has long accused Joe Biden of illegal foreign interference, tells OAN, then Vice President Biden exploited Ukraine through Poroshenko.
Biden
found Poroshenko's weak spot, Biden saw his pathological greed and used it. So in exchange for the $1 billion, Poroshenko sold the sovereignty of Ukraine. The Biden team basically assigned which people would go to which supervisory boards of state-owned companies. Money flowed from there. Before becoming president, Poroshenko made his millions as a chocolate magnate, expanding his money wellsprings across dozens of entities, from candy to cars to sugar to shipyards. He's a very greedy man, and when he became president, his greed was the biggest problem. At a certain point, Poroshenko decided the whole country was his own corporation. So he would be the one helping Biden with Burisma and establishing all these supervisory boards so he could saber rattle and earn money on Russia during the war. Biden at the same time would allow him to do that. Poroshenko could steal as much as he wanted. But unlike Russian oligarchs, Poroshenko's enterprises are more like brotherhoods. Once Poroshenko became president, he appointed his closest allies to powerful positions in the government. Also, unlike Russian oligarchs, rather than tapping into public funds, Poroshenko's dozens of enterprises, along with those of his trusted partners, were conveniently awarded state contracts, billions of dollars in aid funneled to a select few. Indeed, Poroshenko was personally invested in seeing Biden's $1 billion bribe go through. Derkach cites as evidence Poroshenko's own ally and vice prime minister, Ivana Klimpush-Syntsadze. She herself claimed and acknowledged that most of the $1 billion from Biden was dispersed through the big companies like Lenin Smithy, Bogdan, Ukroboronprom, which are all related to Poroshenko. As vice prime minister, she gave the breakdown of where Biden's bribe went. This was open information, openly stated to the press. A cursory attempt to understand Poroshenko's empire is a complicated endeavor, but one thing is certain. OAN has spoken to nearly a dozen Ukrainian sources on record and off, official and unofficial. They all say, one way or another, Poroshenko's companies profited off Biden's billion-dollar taxpayer bribe and off the backs of Ukrainians. Andrei Teleshenko, former diplomat and Ukrainian political consultant, says, as a result, Poroshenko and his brotherhood of oligarchs are being protected by a vast and financially interested apparatus.
Oh, yes, they are. It's even right now, the prosecutor general was trying not to investigate Poroshenko because of the foreign advisement from abroad. Even the State Department today and other countries are advised not to investigate Poroshenko because Ukraine is going to be in trouble, whoever does that. That's what's going on right now. I heard it personally from other officials, from other embassy officials, not to touch Poroshenko. You can touch anybody you want around him, put anybody you want around him.
And what would be the?
Because he has a lot of. They told us because he has a lot of foreign contacts, and you're going to be in a lot of trouble if you do that. That's what I was told personally.
Since Poroshenko lost his re-election effort and became a member of parliament, his nearly every defense has been he is being persecuted by his political enemies, and it's all fueled by big, bad Russia and that villain, Vladimir Putin. That's Poroshenko's public alibi. Here's a recording procured from Ukrainian Secret Service of then-President Poroshenko and President Putin in the spring of 2015, amid what was supposed to be a tense time between Russia and Ukraine.
Мы с вами люди трудящиеся, может и к солидарности придем. Знаете, у нас год официально теперь праздник весны и труда. Вот так вот. Как у вас внутри-то вы справляетесь там со всей ситуацией? Да, справляюсь, чего там. Чем дальше, тем легче, совсем непросто. Но я вам могу сказать, что желающих длинной очереди на должность украинского президента не наблюдается. Зря вы так думаете. Да. Украина — это интересная, красивая страна. Нет, так я горжусь тем. По крайней мере, я горжусь тем, что у меня рейтинг поддержки и доверия не падает. Так что это ключевое, чтобы люди доверяли, самое главное. Это ключевое. Хорошо, Владимир Владимирович. Жму руку. Спасибо большое.
Mortal enemies, these two. A mere snapshot. Hop over to Team Biden in the throes of a basement-based campaign for the presidency. Their response also. It's all Russia. Trump and Russia colluded to throw the election back in 2016. Poroshenko and Ukraine had nothing to do with election interference, declared the Adam Schiff acolytes. Yet, listen to this conversation between Poroshenko and Biden 1 month before the U.S. election in 2016.
And another thing, it's just a joke. We released the important documents from the former regent's party. As far as I understand, one of the key advisors of Mr. Trump, so-called Paul Manafort, is resigned today.
Yeah, I think he's going back to Russia. I don't know.
A bombshell admission. To all this, Poroshenko declares spotless innocence and that the tapes are fake. Does the criminal ever plead guilty right away? I have not heard Poroshenko say anything about his willingness to take these tapes to be verified or assessed. There's a plethora of different ways today to assess or verify a recording. Why won't he have them verified if he wants to clear his name? Indeed, Poroshenko today, as a member of parliament, paints himself to the press the political martyr, the victim. Yet, during his presidency, he was not exactly a friend to the free press. Under Poroshenko's rule, there was not one, but several journalists who were murdered. During a press conference about this, I asked the journalists there in the room, and I said, how many of you would be prepared to stand out and speak out if you had this information? When the case involves billions and billions in corruption, when the case is about President Poroshenko, the answer is not many. In 2015, right in the middle of these negotiations with Joe Biden, Poroshenko issued a sweeping decree banning 41 international journalists, including 3 from the BBC, a move the Committee to Protect Journalists and the international community decried as harmful to democracy and the increasingly hopeless fight against corruption. Biden, supposedly the champion of anti-corruption in Ukraine, did not seem to mind that Poroshenko was banning journalists who were getting too close to their plans. But such details are terribly inconvenient and are to be ignored, especially by Team Biden, who has the most to hide. In 2014, Joe Biden's son, Hunter, joins Burisma, a company renowned for its corruption scandals. In 2015, Hunter Biden is listed by Latvia as being a suspect of money laundering through Ukraine. Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin starts seizing Burisma assets and getting too close to Hunter Biden's activities. By spring of 2016, Joe Biden succeeds in forcing Poroshenko to remove Viktor Shokin and replace him with a man who has zero legal experience. A man he hopes will look the other way on Hunter's Ukrainian cash cow. This victory is short-lived for the Bidens. November rolled in and Donald Trump defied all polls to claim a decisive victory against Hillary Clinton. Biden goes into overdrive to clean up loose ends. November 16, 2016, 2 weeks after Donald Trump's victory, Joe Biden is on the phone with Poroshenko, his voice tenser now than before.
This is getting very, very close. What I don't want to have happen, I don't want Trump to get in a position where he thinks he's about to buy onto a policy where the financial system is going to collapse and he's going to be looked to pour more money into Ukraine. That's how he'll think about it before he gets sophisticated enough to know the detail.
In other words, Biden does not want Ukraine asking for more money from Trump. Doing so would cause Trump to look into the details.
So anything you can do to push the Privat Bank to closure so that the IMF loan comes forward, I would respectfully suggest is critically important to your economic as well as physical security.
Critically important for economic and physical well-being. Biden goes mafia? There is more to this story. On the U.S. side, media looks the other way. Joe Biden has slouched onward despite his Ukraine scandals with the help of a compliant media. Most recently, media rushed to push headlines of innocence when it came to the troubled Hunter Biden. On the surface, this is a damning headline. Ruslan Ryabushatka was considered 100% my guy by the new anti-corruption Ukrainian President Zelensky. And considering Ryabushapka was to specifically tackle the Burisma Biden cases and is now saying Hunter Biden is innocent, case closed, right? Ukrainian diplomat Andrei Teleshenko says, not so fast. Ryabushapka is no longer prosecutor general.
First of all, we have to understand who's Ryabushapka. Ryabushapka is a person coming from the Antag society. So basically, this is a person from a left-wing organization being funded and still is today after he is now ousted as the prosecutor general. The parliament voted to fire him because he didn't do a good job being prosecutor general. He didn't put the Biden case into the works. He didn't do the Poroshenko case into the works. So basically, the parliament voted to fire him. And now, months after being fired, he's talking about how the case is relevant or not relevant to Hunter Biden or Biden himself. He is manipulating and doing it by getting paid from Soros, by getting politically supported by Soros, and this is nobody's talking about this issue with the mass media today.
Teleshenko adds, if there was nothing to the Biden-Burisma cases, why didn't Ryabushapka speak out while he was prosecutor general?
So basically, he's now a private citizen talking about all these claims. What if this was real claims, real stuff to talk about, or real cases that he's talking about, he would have talked about them while he was prosecutor general of Ukraine.
It turns out the prosecutor general filed an official report in 2019 detailing how Burisma tried to bribe the prosecutor general's office with $50 million to close the case and make the Burisma investigation go away. As soon as Ryabushapka took office as prosecutor general, the episode involving $50 million conveniently disappeared. Once Ryabushapka left his post, he went to work for a George Soros-funded nonprofit in Kiev. Conveniently for the Bidens and the Democrat Party, Ryabushapka told the press the Burisma case no longer existed. In early June of 2020, $6 million in cash was uncovered by Ukrainian authorities as part of the massive bribe scheme to shut down investigations into Burisma. The Bidens were quickly dismissed as suspects, but according to prosecutors, the question remains, what happened to the other $44 million? Prosecutor Konstantin Kulik confirms, as of October 2019, the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office signed off on a document that listed the Bidens and Devon Archer's Rosemont Seneca Company as implicated in the $36 million Burisma case. This document simply ceased to exist, along with the $44 million in additional bribe money reportedly waved about back in 2019. $44 million can go a long way in a place like Ukraine. As Western headlines continue to push the pure innocence of Hunter and Joe Biden in the Ukraine saga, few bother to mention details that clearly compromise their perfect pictures. With over 10 hours of Biden-Poroshenko recordings, OAN can only broadcast what can be verified. What we have shown you to this point is what we have verified. What you have heard is merely the surface, though, a mere snapshot of a much bigger picture. While media continue to try and run cover for the Bidens, attacking the messengers in an effort to deflect from the message, this scandal is too big. The stakes are too high to stop until justice is served. And while it is easy to fend off from the likes of hit pieces by The Atlantic, The Washington Post, and other liberal rags, the screeching media is of fractional concern in light of the greater powers intent on smothering this story. Derkach says, back in Ukraine, the U.S. Embassy is still run by the Democrat Party. And even more alarming is their reaction to the release of these recordings. The acting ambassador, Christina Kvien, visited Zelensky's office, as well as the law enforcement agencies, Ministry of Interior, the prosecutor's office, and she said she would like them not to investigate these recordings. If Derkach's information here is correct, this appears to be a member of the State Department interfering with the internal affairs of a foreign country in order to protect the Bidens. They tell me she also had some sort of document she claimed was signed somewhere by the U.S. State Department. When some of the managers from law enforcement asked her if she could share that document, she said no, she couldn't share it, that they could only read the text in her hand. OAN reached out to the U.S. Embassy in Kiev for the acting ambassador's comment, As of this broadcast, the acting ambassador has not responded. This is an ongoing investigation, so stay tuned for the next edition of the Biden Bribe Tapes. Tune in every Saturday and Sunday for new editions of OAN Investigates from your team here at One America News. I'm Chanel Vian. Thank you for joining me. Until next time. In Part 3 of the special edition of One American News Investigates, we continue to dismantle the explosive Biden bribe tapes. Procured from Ukrainian Secret Service, the recordings of Joe Biden and former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko you have heard so far confirm the investigations of John Solomon, Peter Schweitzer, OAN, Rudy Giuliani, and others. That is, Joe Biden unequivocally abused his power as vice president to shield and enrich his son in Ukraine. Worse, the recordings confirm a devastating truth. Democrats waving the Russia wand are pulling the greatest projection stunt of our lifetimes, and Ukraine is a portal to exposing their hoax. Before diving into the rest of the Biden tapes, we need first to better grasp why Biden and Democrats were obsessed with pillaging Ukraine. The story you are about to witness is a journey through the Biden Democrat looking glass into a world where up is down, down is up, and truth is smothered by the fog of greed, lies, and cover-ups. When history looks back on President Trump, it will be objectively astounding he was able to accomplish as much of his America First agenda as he did against the cacophony of Democrat resistance. The left's resistance cry came from every direction, none more unified than their obsession with Russia. In the 2019 film Revealing Ukraine by Igor Lopatinok and award-winning filmmaker Oliver Stone, the obsession Russia interfered in the 2016 election and delivered Donald Trump's victory is as absurd as it was repetitious.
They're calling it the digital equivalent of 9/11.
A new report from the U.S. intelligence community says that Putin and the Russian government conspired to help President-elect Donald Trump's election chances.
This is an electronic Watergate.
Russia did not help me.
The FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election.
Lopatinok tells One American News the Democrats' Russia obsession is a cover for Democrat crimes in Ukraine. Joe Biden, as vice president, led the charge.
My country was destroyed because of action of Biden. Ukraine, it was a big casualties. People go die in the war. I cannot, as a journalist, as a filmmaker, I cannot just sit and wait. I need to raise my voice because I believe even the single person opinion can change something. This is why we do the Bribe.
The film goes further, going where no mainstream journalist, media, or political party dare. Stone goes straight to Vladimir Putin himself, president of Russia, in a series of revealing interviews.
Obviously, Russia's been accused over and over again of interference in the 2016 election.
Я и тогда не вмешивался, сейчас не хочу вмешиваться, и в будущем не собираюсь.
But now in the U.S. there's been investigation about Ukraine's interference in the election. It was a very confusing situation. Poroshenko seems to have been very strongly pro-Clinton, anti-Trump.
Ну да, здесь секрета никакого.
Stone asks Putin's take on what Stone sees as the real threat. The exchange that ensues has never been published before now.
The Clinton campaign accumulated the Steele dossier. They put together, they paid for it. That came from strange sources, the whole Steele dossier issue, and it comes through, some of it comes through Ukraine. They also went out of their way with the, it seems to me, with the CIA, with Mr. Brenner, John Brennan, and with Clapper, James Clapper, and Comey of the FBI. They all seem to have gotten involved, all the intelligence agencies, and in an anti-Trump way,
Ну, в их руках был административный ресурс, это ничего здесь такого неожиданного. Они использовали вот административный ресурс. Он всегда дает преимущество где-то, ну, в среднем, в таких странах США, некоторых странах Западной Европы, 2%, как минимум.
2%?
Да, ну, это примерно это мнение экспертов о том, что те, кто обладают административным ресурсом, у них всегда есть фора в 2%.
Well, you're not disagreeing. You're saying that it's quite possible that there was an attempt to prevent Donald Trump from coming into office with a soft, what I'll call it a soft coup d'etat.
В США?
Yes.
Ну, так это до сих пор происходит.
For Stone, a tainted intelligence community working against Donald Trump tried to derail the votes of millions of Americans. Media not only ignored the soft coup, but propped up a boogeyman in Russia. For Lopatonok, what began as a mission to tell the story of Ukrainian revolution became a much bigger story entailing American politics.
When I come to Oliver Stone 2014, there was no understanding the role of Biden or Hillary Clinton or Obama administration. Everybody see that as a revolution. And it was a, it was a big discontent in society, of course, and people love to changes, but the revolution was hijacked. And that was hijacked by corrupted people in Ukraine with a big help of Vice President Biden and all the gang that was worked with him.
Biden bribing Ukrainian leadership to stop investigating his son's business dealings in Ukraine is merely a snapshot. Lopatonok says Biden's cronyism could not be easier to demonstrate. Yet, media squashes all questions of Biden wrongdoing.
We will take the hit from the whole press. Usually it's mainstream media who hate our story, who hate our speakers, who hate everything what we did. We like it. If they hate, we're doing something right.
Worse, any opposition to Biden is automatically Russian influence.
I, first of all, investigate who called me a Russian propagandist. And it was very interesting. Daily Beast, the little left-wing, like a crazy radical publication, and they owned by company named IAC. The company who owned IAC, the chief of the board is daughter of Hillary Clinton.
One example of many. Ultimately, Lopatonok and Stone and their interviews make a controversial point.
Mr. Soros is behind this too. Because this is a team of Democrats. Nuland, Soros, Biden, in favor of the interests of Hillary Clinton, did everything to prevent Mr. Trump from being elected in the 2016 elections.
For a different perspective, we next meet Ukraine's former chief of spies and intelligence. He shares with us a baffling situation that seems to testify to an ongoing Democrat Party cover-up. We'll be right back. On August 7, 2020, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence's William Evanina issued a report on U.S. election interference going into 2020. Evanina warns China, Iran, and Russia are all trying to interfere in America's upcoming election. But when it came to Russia, however, without naming names in the other countries, Evanina specifically warns that Russia is concerned about a Biden presidency and is using a Ukrainian member of parliament, Andrei Derkach, a man OAN has interviewed in past investigations, as a tool by which to take down Joe Biden and thereby interfere in U.S. elections. Evanina goes on to specifically warn about tape recordings that could affect the election. OAN has aired some of these recordings and has accessed hours more. Incidentally, not through Derkach. Here are some recordings we showed you in the last investigation.
This is getting very, very close. What I don't want to have happen, I don't want Trump to get in a position where he thinks he's about to buy onto a policy where the financial system is going to collapse and he's going to be looked to pour more money into Ukraine. That's how he'll think about it before he gets sophisticated enough to know the detail.
Remember, this conversation is dated 2 weeks after President Trump's election victory. What was a vice president doing calling the president of another country, telling him to wrap up business before the incoming president gets savvy? These recordings, claim Evanina, are being pushed by Russia through Andrei Derkach because Russia fears a Biden presidency. Looking into Evanina, though, Evanina started in the FBI and moved his way up. In 2014, Evanina was appointed by James Clapper, Obama's Director of National Intelligence, to head the Office of National Counterintelligence, a post Evanina carried over into the Trump administration with a formal nomination. A James Clapper ally is once again sounding the Russia is a threat alarm. The same James Clapper who coordinated with Obama's Susan Rice, James Comey, and John Brennan an illegal spying operation on Trump to fabricate Russia collusion charges? That James Clapper? Yes, Derkach responds to Evanina's accusations, arguing Evanina's report affirms the verity of the recordings. Quote, "They chose the strategy of attacking the source. The reaction shows how accurately we hit the target. We are not interested in Biden as a candidate for U.S. president. We are interested in Biden as a former U.S. vice president who covered up Poroshenko's corruption schemes while making money himself." Derkach adds his sole mission is to expose the corruption and retrieve for Ukraine $6 billion that had been stolen from the Ukrainian taxpayer under President Poroshenko. We tracked down the one voice in Ukrainian intelligence who could, from the outside, weigh in. Valentin Nalivaychenko, twice former head of Ukraine's security service, the U.S. equivalent of CIA director, confirms One America's earlier reporting and sourcing of these tapes and says these recordings, if made without authorization, would of course have been illegal. But Nalivaychenko says that these were likely ordered by Poroshenko himself.
That's clearly that the sound is from the Mr. Poroshenko's office. It was made at the Ukrainian side and in the Ukrainian president office when we had Mr. Poroshenko as a president. I assume might happen that Mr. Poroshenko, former president of Ukraine, himself ordered his guards, this is the special secret service, the only source of such recordings and tapes.
Nalivaychenko was also the country's foreign minister, a diplomat, and today serves as a member of Ukrainian parliament. Nalivaychenko says Poroshenko siphoned millions into offshore accounts off Ukrainian and American taxpayers. Despite having over 24 Ukrainian court cases against Poroshenko, cases are simply not being investigated.
I insist in Ukrainian parliament that in Ukraine law enforcement bodies and Ukraine prosecutor general office must investigate those cases, those proofs, evidence, and so far and so on. I think we must, in Ukraine, we must prove that we are trusted and reliable partner in fight against corruption, starting and being concentrated on Ukrainian corruption at the top during Poroshenko presidency.
Currently, Joe Biden is listed in at least one criminal case for illegally influencing a Ukrainian government official. Nalivaychenko says this is not about politics. This is about crimes committed on Ukrainian soil. Crimes don't care about whether you have dreams for the presidency.
For instance, when we are talking about money laundering, of course, FBI might be the best and the only agency which could help investigate the case here in Ukraine. But again, the investigation itself must be conducted in Ukraine and by Ukrainian General Prosecutor's office, and that's the only way.
Every time a prosecutor general steps foot in that office, cases against Biden and Burisma-related cases mysteriously disappear.
It was very unusual even when the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, with such powers in his or her hands, doing nothing. Again, there is no any official investigation launched. That's not good for Ukraine and for all, let's say, democracy. My clear vision is to act according to the Ukrainian law, to launch criminal investigation on Ukrainian top corrupt persons, starting with Mr. Poroshenko, to involve or to ask for any international legal assistance, and then to see what leaks.
That includes the U.S., Joe Biden, tracking down the well-documented money laundering trail left by Hunter Biden and Devon Archer across Ukraine and Europe, and includes prosecuting Poroshenko for allowing Biden to bribe him with U.S. tax dollars. U.S. elections regardless. Ukraine has suffered. Men like Poroshenko are getting away behind the shield of Joe Biden and the excuse of not wanting to, quote, interfere in America's elections. When we return, we visit with Viktor Shokin, the prosecutor general Biden so feared would expose his son Hunter's money laundering. Shokin brings with him astounding updates on his criminal case against Joe Biden. We'll be right back. We're about to reunite with Ukraine's former prosecutor general Viktor Shokin. The last time we saw him, OAN tracked him down in Kiev, Ukraine, and interviewed him there with Rudy Giuliani in November 2019. He shared with us then some astounding details about the circumstances of his dismissal as prosecutor general. The bottom line, Shokin was pushed out because his office seized Burisma assets in a massive money laundering investigation. Hunter Biden was in the thick of it. So Joe Biden picked up the phone and, using $1 billion U.S. tax dollars, made the problem of Viktor Shokin disappear. Let's go back in time. May 13, 2014, Barack Obama is in his second term. Hunter Biden has just been appointed to the board of Ukraine's biggest oil and gas company. His dad, the Vice President Joe Biden, happens to be Ukraine's point man. Even the Washington Post raised an ethical eyebrow. Most saw Hunter's swanky appointment as a conflict of interest. Most, except Obama's State Department.
Has any concerns or any thoughts about the Vice President's son joining the board of directors of this Ukrainian gas company? Does, in particular, I understand why the White House would refer this to the Vice President's office, but does this building diplomatically have any concerns about potential perceptions of conflict or / cronyism, which is what you've often accused the Russians of doing?
No, he's a private citizen.
Okay, but then do you consider that the Russian oligarchs who control, or the Ukrainian oligarchs who control these, they're all private citizens as well?
Not only did the Obama State Department see no problem with the drug-addled son of the vice president getting rich off his father's influence in Ukraine, Secretary of State John Kerry himself even tried to intervene later down the road.
Before Vice President Biden comes, I just wanted to try to urge you to see if there's a way to get by this problem of replacing the prosecutor general, Shokin, because from our perception, he's blocked the cleanup of the prosecutor general's office, and I know the vice president is very concerned about it.
DNC-controlled media will tell you it's absolutely irrelevant. Kerry's chief of staff made $90,000 in lobbying fees from Burisma. And then, of course, it's also irrelevant that Kerry's stepson's roommate and his own political advisor, Devon Archer, was on the board of Burisma with Hunter Biden at this time. To all this, the media screams, ignore the facts, this is Russian propaganda. But back to Shokin. After we interviewed Shokin in Kiev, Shokin sent the Ukrainian Government of Investigations, the DBR, a formal request to investigate Joe Biden's bribery of President Poroshenko. They refused to open the case, which is illegal. I went to court. On February 22nd, the courts ordered the DBR to legally open an investigation into Joe Biden and President Poroshenko, as I requested. Despite the courts siding with Shokin, he still ran into obstacles. Anything to do with the Bidens were strangely scrubbed. So they opened the criminal case, but the DBR lied. They opened a criminal case, but erased the name Joe Biden. Instead, they penciled in American citizen. Someone told the DBR to remove Biden's name from the investigation, and they did. Shokin filed another suit. The courts again sided with Shokin, ruling that Joe Biden should be formally listed in the investigation.
Никто не реагирует вообще совершенно.
Nobody is doing anything over here at the top. Everyone's keeping quiet. The Ukrainian government is still trying to protect Joe Biden. Shokin adds, the reason is simple. Joe Biden's team appointed many in powerful positions in Ukraine today. Shokin says they're even in President Zelensky's office now. Shokin gave the current Ukrainian president's team a roadmap on how to lawfully and legally proceed in the criminal case against Joe Biden. But I was told directly, because it will be perceived as interference in the upcoming U.S. elections, they are afraid to do anything. I have good news for me and bad news for Joe Biden. On August 4, the Appeals Court of Ukraine exonerated my reputation, ruling I was wrongfully accused of being a, quote, corrupt official. My name has been cleared. I would like Mr. Biden to know that. That Shokin was a, quote, corrupt prosecutor was fabricated by Joe Biden to cover up a sinister reality. Biden was protecting his son Hunter from investigation. Joe had to come up with a good excuse. So the story was, Shokin was corrupt, even if they knew Shokin did nothing wrong.
Joe, I have a second positive news for you. Yesterday, I met with the General Prosecutor Shokin.
Yes.
And despite of the fact that we didn't have any corruption charges, we don't have any information about he doing something wrong, I especially asked him to resign.
Nothing is being investigated in Ukraine for fear it will be perceived as election interference. But to Shokin, this is not political. This is about Joe Biden's crimes as vice president, not as a presidential candidate. This is about justice. This is about ruined reputations and stolen billions. This is about law and order. Next up, scandal in Russia. For the Democrats? You won't believe the hypocrisy. We'll be right back. As evidence for Russian election interference has amounted to exactly zilch, the Russia did it narrative skulked into the ethers of the Democrat playbook. But weeks out from the November 2020 election, the Russia boogeyman has been resuscitated, starting with Eva Nina's DNI August report. Seamus Brunner, co-author of Fallout, along with investigative journalist John Solomon, argues media and Obama leftovers at the DNI portraying the Trump administration as Putin sympathizers is comical.
It's an absurd suggestion that the Trump administration has been soft on Russia. Like, nobody was softer on Russia than Barack Obama. The Russia hoax was really a cover-up of the Obama-Biden administration's own failed Russia policy. And we have at least a dozen examples in the book showing just giveaway after giveaway after giveaway to Putin from Obama.
Biden, says Brunner, was central to the Obama's power giveaways to Russia, scrapping missile defense plans for Europe, decimating U.S. nuclear defense capabilities, surrendering American uranium assets, signing off on billions in new nuclear utilities, and, ironically, technology transfers to the Kremlin.
Skolkovo, for those who don't know, was Russia's attempt to recreate Silicon Valley in Moscow. And a lot of the companies who got juiced in Russia were major Clinton Foundation donors. Hillary's State Department promoted this initiative. And it's absolutely ironic because there's a hacking element to Skolkovo. There's a military component to Skolkovo. And so the Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of State are promoting this Russian cyber initiative that very ironically could have resulted in the hacking of our government agency.
Worse, Brunner points to a top Biden advisor for Ukraine, Amos Hochstein, who testifies before Congress that Russia is a national security threat trying to dominate the energy sphere.
What he testifies is absolutely correct. What Amos does not tell Congress or anybody, and would prefer that nobody knew, was that he was on the payroll of a lobbying company specifically helping Russia corner energy markets, specifically the uranium market in the United States.
Smoke and mirrors, classic sleight of hand.
He was working with the Uranium One whistleblower, William Campbell, to help the Russians enter the American uranium space. And he was working very closely with the Russians. He had numerous high-level government officials coming into Washington, meeting at his lobbying firm and meeting at, hotels in Washington, talking about how do we enter the uranium space. And he gives them some very brilliant advice. He says you need to Americanize, his words, Americanize your efforts by partnering with American entities. Don't make this seem like it's a Russia goal. Make it seem like it's in the best interest of Americans. And he does it very successfully by partnering with the American utility companies.
As if it weren't bad enough, Hochstein, Biden's top Ukraine advisors in the till for the Kremlin, literally was paid to lobby for Moscow's interests. It gets better. Hunter Biden and his business partner, Devon Archer, also have Moscow interests. That Biden-Archer company that processed Burisma money, Rosemont Seneca, turns out Rosemont Seneca got its start in Russian money. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth flowing from Moscow to Joe Biden's son and John Kerry's advisor. Funding from top Russian oligarchs, names like Moscow Mayor Lushkov, Gutseriev, and Guzelnikov. These names don't mean much to many of you watching now, but remember these names. This is an ongoing investigation. In the next edition of the Biden Bribe Tapes, we show why these names are devastating to the deep state's Russia narrative. Thanks to the Biden scandals in Ukraine, we are exposing them all. I'm Chanel Rion. Thank you for joining me. Tune in every Saturday and Sunday for new editions of OAN Investigates from your team here at One American News. Until next time.